This episode of Collin Votes is brought to you by Jeff for Collin County. If you would like to donate or volunteer, or to get more information, please visit jeffforcollincounty.com. That's JEFF, the number 4, collincounty.com. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Collin Votes, and my name is Shanna Wilder. I'm here again with Jeff Williams, running for Collin County Commissioner, Place 4.
That's right.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, you've been at it for a while.
It's, it feels like we're doing 48 hours every day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just clipping along, and here we are just about 30 days out from when early voting starts. So things are ramping up big time.
It's getting crazy, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be nice to finally have it all kind of, but big push towards the end.
Yeah. And I don't really think people understand or appreciate what it's like to have your name on a ballot, what the kind of work that goes into it.
Oh, no.
So.
No, you've been out there a lot.
Yeah.
Knocking a lot of doors, making a lot of appearances.
Yeah. I just jumped in the race in November, and that was primary season, so that was a full-on sprint to March 1st.
Yeah.
And then we had a bit of a break, at least for me anyway. Some candidates, they have to keep campaigning because they're either in a runoff or just the nature of their election, like a county-wide seat, for example, or a bigger geographic territory. They just basically have to campaign all year. So I know.
Well, that's great. Well, today we're here to help introduce everyone to you and get to know you and your platform so that they can be informed about the voting options out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was looking forward to it. So this will be fun.
All right. So let's start off. Give us a little bit of background about who you are, where you're from. Like, you're not native to Texas.
I am not, no.
But you got here as fast as you could.
Right.
As the saying goes.
I do have some roots in Texas. Some of my extended family is from and around the Houston area. I moved here in 2005. Actually, my wife had already moved with her family. We're both from New Orleans, and we met in graduate school there. So I came up here, and later on, and I found work, and eventually we got married, but we made our home here. So, and she has her family. She has her immediate family and some extended family. They're all here in North Texas. So,
that's right.
So she's got roots, so I've got roots too.
I got to meet her parents at the bowling event.
Yeah.
The other day. That was great. I recognized them. I could see the similarities in the faces. And since you guys moved here, you've been in the financial planning business, helping.
Well, yeah.
Am I saying that correctly?
No, you did it right. When I first got here, I worked for some big names in financial services as an employee, but eventually, I say it probably took me about 20 years to figure out that, I was tired of being an employee.
Yeah.
It was time to be an entrepreneur. I think I was always ready for that.
Time to be your own boss.
Yeah. So in 2011, I started a mobile notary service here in North Texas, which was very auspicious because that was right when the first refi boom was taking place, because after the financial crisis, they cut rates down and everybody was refinancing. And then, so that was and has been a pretty lucrative business. And actually the COVID year was my best year as far as that business goes, because every single person I knew was probably refinancing. And it wasn't just because the rates were lower, it was because people were looking for ways to save money.
Absolutely.
And that was and home values were appreciating because now everybody was home, or people were looking to buy homes because they were working from home now. So it was kind of a perfect storm. But But on top of that, I mean, my background is in financial services, and I became a financial advisor, a licensed financial advisor at 19. But I finally started my own practice in 2014. So, and that's Littlewoods Capital Advisors.
And if I'm remembering the conversations that we've had previously about that correctly, you started Littlewoods basically because you saw kind of like the system that you were stuck in, and it wasn't really utilized. It wasn't really built to help people who needed services most.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
The financial services business as we know it is really catered to only one type of client, and those people would be, financially independent, would be the simplest way to say it, but it's mostly upper middle income or, uber, ultra wealthy. Yeah. So
helping the rich get richer.
Right. but I mean, it wasn't only just a personal decision on my part to want to help people who, are at the lower end of the economic chart, people who really need that kind of advice the most.
Absolutely.
I mean, sure, even wealthy people have trouble managing their own money. But especially if you have a spouse that doesn't work and they like to spend money.
That's true. Yeah.
So budgeting becomes an issue there. But also because, I like the idea of having my own practice and not having someone looking over my shoulder. And it was a practical, business decision because so many people are fishing in that one pond and it's not very big. It is getting bigger, but not big enough so that everybody, who wants to be in the business can make it. It's a lot like being a lawyer who wants to strike out on his or her own.
Sure.
It's hard to do that, as an entrepreneur. So, but I've got a small practice and my clients like me, which is good. So
the main reason I bring it up is it seems like that's kind of been the thing that probably lit the fire for you to enter into politics. Is like you were someone who could see through your interactions with people, like the needs that there were and kind of the overall inability to meet those needs sometimes. And sometimes running into things where it's like, that needs some update, that needs to change. We could think about this. And that kind of boosted you to an activity then, like to stop just looking at the problems and start doing something about them.
Right. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
And also if for those who are listening and are, making their considerations now as to who they want to vote for, one of the ways I feel like I differ from my opponent is that, and it's funny because I was talking with another candidate about this, we just seem to agree that there's enormous clarity in service. And he and I, during the space of this particular conversation, we're talking about how we were basically service-oriented people, throughout our professional life.
Sure.
Right. And what I mean by clarity is I understand who I'm working for.
Right.
And that's the people that vote for me.
Right.
Not just, the privileged few, which is always, the case.
I know.
I've heard one politician say he hangs up a frame in his office. It says the boss on the bottom, and every week he puts a new picture of a constituent in the frame, so that it reminds him. Yeah, it's cool. So that it reminds him of what's important, who he's fighting for.
Yeah.
So that would be my biggest contribution to that. And also, when we're talking about my background in business, there are a lot of similarities in terms of how you manage a political organization, for instance, in terms of, operational needs, just being a manager and a boss, because those things still apply. If you look at, if we go back to 2008, for example, the Obama campaign, you can tell that campaign was run like a Swiss watch because they were able to dominate all the new media channels and everything. And I don't mean in the sense that, they were always the story, although there was some of that, but they knew very early on the power of social media
and how to harness it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So they knew all the ways to reach people, which is kind of similar to being a business owner. You gotta work every channel that you can.
Absolutely. So tell everyone that's listening a little bit about the actual role of a county commissioner.
Right. So there are 254 counties in Texas. Every single one of them has, regardless of their population, has a commissioner's court.
Okay.
And it's basically like a town council or a city council, but it's at the top of county government. Okay. So in Collin, that carries a specific importance because we have over 1 million people here.
Oh.
And
it feels like it some days, but I had no idea.
Right. You almost take it for granted.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like Collin is a big suburb anyway, although once you get on the highways, it starts to feel like, it starts to have all the hallmarks of a big city,
Yeah.
But the commissioner role is one where, first of all, our main statutory mandate, so what the laws tell us to do, what they empower us to do, mainly is to run the county budget. And the county budget includes some very important essential services like the sheriff's office, which runs the jail, runs patrol, 911 systems,
right.
the courthouse,
right.
the clerk's office, all of that stuff. And then we get into other areas like, maintaining and building roads and,
Yeah.
So, but the power of the county budget, particularly in a big county like this one, is, like I said, it takes on a particular significance.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great, actually. Yeah. It's so funny because I hear so many people get very concerned with just voting in the general election.
Right.
And they really don't understand how local elections can much more significantly affect your daily lives and then the overall course of the country, period, more so than maybe general elections.
Yeah, and that's why you see not just in midterm general election years, but also in those primaries, you see very low voter turnout because those tend to be more local oriented races. Mm-hmm. And people just don't feel the impact in their lives from, local officials in a direct sense.
Right.
And it's because they're more plugged into the national politics of the day that's easier for them to, get excited about or understand.
Yeah.
And it's also, I think, an explanation as to why it's so hard to get younger voters out, because they in particular don't feel the importance of the elections for local officials. So
I agree with you. However, I'm going to point out that I feel like there's a lot of video content that's coming out lately on social media that's showing very bizarre circumstances happening, like at school board meetings or like impacts of state laws. And everyone's kind of going, how does this happen? Where does this come from? And it's starting to kind of light people up and make them curious about like, well, how do we prevent this kind of crazy stuff that we see happening? So I feel like in a lot of ways, like, I don't want to say these wild events are good, but they spark an involvement and a curiosity about what exactly goes on, kind of behind the curtain.
No, I agree with you. More, and this has happened more recently.
Yeah.
I've seen younger people get more plugged in.
Yeah.
Because it's easier for them to do that now.
Yeah.
Social media has, like I said, it goes back to creating these channels where basically everybody is a fledgling reporter, right? But I mean, there are times where, I was in, a Popeyes yesterday standing in line and I saw the people working there and I'm thinking, and I was wearing my campaign t-shirt because I'd been out delivering yard signs.
Hey.
But I was thinking to myself, if I were to ask any of these young people if they were planning to vote or who they were voting for or who their county commissioner was or if they were even registered, the kind of answers that I would get back, So, but that said, there are a number of terrific young people that work on campaigns, that volunteer their
absolutely.
time, even work. And we were talking about this before we got on. That even run campaigns. So it's a young people's game now in a way.
It's good.
But we definitely, particularly in the Democratic Party, I feel like the energy comes from not the issues, but from young people.
I think so.
They're the ones that energize, and it's very organic. It kind of flows from the ground up. Right.
I also think it's something that with most people, even if they don't have an understanding, like when I just asked you to kind of explain a county commissioner's role, maybe we don't understand how that impacts us. But then when you are able to say, okay, well, let me tell you how. Let me walk you through it. It's like, oh, well, now I understand why I want to be involved in this. And that's always a good thing, regardless of age.
Right, right. And if you ask anybody that's involved in voting politics, they will tell you, like in Texas, I should say, that a race like mine, it requires a lot of education.
Oh, yeah.
So I have to do certain things that, other candidates wouldn't necessarily, like a candidate like Beto, he doesn't have to worry about explaining what a governor does. He has he can take all his time talking about what he's, what he's for.
Yeah.
So
it's so funny. I said to a friend of mine the other day that you were out knocking doors and canvassing neighborhoods. And he said, people do that still?
Oh, yeah.
He said, I've seen like candidate rallies where the people come to them, but I've never had a candidate knock on my door and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. They still do that. Well, and it's fantastic.
Those are the doors I like to knock on.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll ask, I'm like, am I the first
Do people
candidate?
think you're just a schmuck for a candidate?
Right, right.
Who's this Jeff guy? And you're like, it's me. Right. It's me.
It's my t-shirt. I'm not wearing this for somebody else. I'm doing it. Yeah, those are the conversations I enjoy because I'll ask sometimes, I'm not the first person that's ever
Yeah.
knocked on your door who was running for something. And I'd imagine by and large, most people haven't had that kind of contact. And that forget about the anecdotal evidence that you have. Just if you look to the studies, that's the number one. Well, actually, the number one way to get someone to vote for you is through like personal networking.
Yeah.
Your family telling other people, and then kind of like a chain letter goes on and on. And we even have, initiatives like that. Like at meetings, we'll talk about, hey, go through your contacts. 10 people who haven't voted or didn't vote last year or aren't planning to vote in this election. Go make them do that, and then tell them to do the same. Find 10 contacts of theirs, and then,
That's what the presenter did to us the other night. Held us hostage at the dinner, made us pull out our phones.
Right.
Bless her. Right now. No, I want you to do it right now. Pull out your phone. Look at 10 people.
Right. This is an exercise.
That was fantastic.
So, but people, human nature being what it is, it's a lot harder to do that. But aside from that, the next best way to engage with voters is to do it by meeting them where they are, and that's knocking on doors. So,
yep, that's very true. So you're able to kind of tell the people how the role of county commissioner can affect or better their lives.
Yeah, I mean, that could be part of the conversation, or a lot of times I kind of let them steer it. For instance, there was this one day where another candidate and I hit a man's door, and he kind of looked at us he didn't open the glass door on the outside of his front door. He said, do you guys like Trump? And we kind of looked at each other because we didn't know how to answer. Because one of the things we're doing now is, in the general, is we're trying to appeal more to crossover voters or leaners.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, sir, I'm not a fan. And my friend over was like, yeah, no, sir, we're not supporters. He's like, good. He opens the door, takes the literature out of our hands, like snatches it. And he's like, this will be the easiest vote you ever got. We're like, okay. So.
Okay, that's not the ideal, but it's funny.
Right. But you kind of, those kinds of moments keep you going.
Yeah.
Because it's not, it's a lot like.
It's not easy.
It reminds me of, my cold calling days when I first got in, financial services business. And when people had landlines and, that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
But it's definitely, I mean, I don't think there's a better way to do it. And especially in a race like mine, because I got to meet people. I got to have those one-on-one conversations.
Well, this is also where you get in touch with the needs of the people that you'll be representing. So.
Right. Yeah. And that does provide a lot of insight that's useful. And, I mean, we're going to use other methods to try and reach voters. But like I said, in my race, that requires a lot of education. If I were to hire surrogates to go out and knock doors for me, yeah, that's still good, but it's not as good. Yeah. Because they don't get to meet me.
That's exactly right.
So.
Okay. So let's get into the meat of it then, and tell us what makes you different from your opponent.
Well, I kind of touched on this earlier in the sense that I'm not in this race just to run a race, just to get elected. You
don't want to be a career politician?
No. Well, I think there is a difference between having a political career and being a career politician.
Oh, absolutely.
And
one is profiting from, and then the other one's there to, actually. Yeah.
Right. And there are people on the commissioner's court here in Collin, everywhere that, they're kind of like let them eat cake people. They're just so
removed.
They're so removed from the people that they represent that it's kind of staggering that they'd be able to stick around as long as they have. But I want people to know that I'm always going to be a resource for them once I'm elected, so they can come to me, and it doesn't matter what concerns they have. It's if you know how to be a professional, then I think it makes it a lot easier. And you have to have thick skin. I mean, this is,
You are a person who is very much grounded in your beliefs and your ethics rather than politics. I know that's a weird thing to say on a political podcast, but
no, that's definitely true.
Okay.
That's definitely true. And I wasn't necessarily groomed for this by like some, apparatus or organization, you know. This was like a calling for me,
Yeah.
And right now in Collin County, I mean, there are 40 elected positions in Collin County government. All of them are held by Republicans. And we haven't had a Democrat there in quite some time. I mean, we're talking decades. And that means commissioners, clerks, judges, sheriffs, constables, justices of the peace. It doesn't matter. So more than anything, it's time for, some healthy opposition.
It's time for the people who represent the people to reflect more of the people.
Right, exactly.
Because Collin County has changed significantly.
Yes, and it's ethnic, concentration is changing every day.
Very much so. Yes.
Which
makes it great to live here.
Oh, absolutely.
No, sorry, seriously, I love it.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another reason I think what separates me from the the government entity that I'll be entering is I'm much more amenable to having conversations. I'm not going to ignore certain constituencies like my opponent or the people that I would be working with do.
Gotcha.
It's a sad fact.
It is.
But particularly like the South Asian community, for example. One of the pillars of my campaign has been trying to do outreach there.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like they're not being approached enough. And I mean, they're very stable. They have a very powerful, organized political base here. They raise their families here. They pay taxes here. They
tons of businesses.
Yeah, they are the community.
Absolutely.
So to ignore them is
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you want to start talking about topics?
Sure.
Okay. So let's go with crime and justice.
Okay.
What do you bring into the table there?
Well, first of all, we talked about the county budget as being the primary mandate for a commissioner is running that. The biggest piece of the county budget goes to public safety, without question.
Interesting.
So that's the sheriff's office, that's the county jail, that's juvenile detention, that's patrols on the road, so on and so forth. So right now, and to be fair, this is kind of endemic to law enforcement across the country because of COVID. We're seeing people leave law enforcement either because COVID itself created too much stress, or crime rates have spiked in their particular areas where it's almost feel like they're overwhelmed.
Right.
They feel there's a certain kind of hopelessness that's kind of permeating because of that.
Sure.
But with a county like Collin, that's one of the wealthiest counties in the state, if not the country. For us not to have a fully staffed, sheriff's office or county jail or what have you, to me that just doesn't track. We need to, and there's been a lot of hot debate about how we should fund law enforcement,
right,
or reform it. And I always tell people, look, we need police, and if it means giving them more money so that we can fill those vacancies. I mean, nearly half of the sheriff's office is vacant right now in terms of the positions open.
That's crazy.
And so far, the county's answer to that has been to hire a recruiter. And I'm like, well, this really isn't an HR problem. It's bigger than that. So I want to see if we can get more funding. Even though it's our biggest expense, we are not paying these people what we should be. We should be offering better pay, better benefits, and maybe even see if we can raise hiring standards at the same time.
Sure.
And we should also be reaching out to, post-secondary institutions in the area. Right now, Collin College is the only one that's indigenous to Collin County.
Right.
University of Texas at Dallas straddles, Collin and Dallas counties.
Sure.
But as far as, and it's kind of amazing to say out loud, a place like this, we don't have our own 4-year university.
Yeah.
We should be, if we don't have those relationships, we should be creating them and leveraging them so that people who want to go into criminal justice, we can create like a natural pipeline from those schools, or maybe even high school if we can get that far, right into county government. So that's one way that we, or I should say another way we can deal with that particular problem.
Sure.
But what happens is when you have a staffing shortage, like in this situation, it has a ripple effect that people don't really realize or understand. It means that inmates, like at the county jail, for example, get less supervision. And if you're an inmate who has a mental disability,
That creates a very bad environment. Yes.
there are too many sparks around that powder keg in that instance. Beto will joke on the trail that the only place to get mental health services is in the county jail system.
Yep.
And he's, to an extent, he's right.
Yeah.
Particularly here in Collin, and even there, it's not good. So, so those are the things that just having forced depletion creates problems in other areas.
Right.
It also makes it harder on the justice system as a whole because judges can't
overwhelm the resources.
They can't run their courts properly. Can't. I mean, the shuffling of paperwork, just the logistics of it all gets, it creates a bottleneck. So when people talk about supply chain in the area of in the age of COVID, it's not just business that gets affected.
Manpower too.
It's manpower, but
to the community.
Yeah, but we don't think about how it affects essential services.
Yeah.
In terms of particularly law enforcement. I mean, in America, that's probably the most important, even though we don't put it up there necessarily in conversations, but it is, because that feeds into our justice system, and if that's not running right, then nothing gets done.
Nope. So on the one hand, you're wanting to increase the manpower of the sheriff's office. What about increasing more trust within the community?
Right. One of the things that I propose is that we create a board to address public safety needs. An advisory board that's made up of not just law enforcement experts, but people from the community in different, occupations,
right.
So that we have a direct line to them. And also I would want to make sure that that advisory board is, has a complexion that matches the community now.
Right.
I mean,
representative sample.
Exactly. And in 2020, the census told us that in Collin, whites now make up roughly 51% of the population, and that's down about 10 points, I believe.
Yeah.
So to ignore that.
So to have all white public advisory board would be ridiculous. To put it.
It would
extremely bluntly.
It makes not if your aim is to have community policing. No. We have to have their input, and whenever I'm doing events, with organizations, how. People of color, I always say, look, if you want to help, one of the best ways you can help is to run.
Yeah.
Be a candidate.
That's very true.
Because you have to be personally vested in the communities that you're
absolutely
that you belong to.
But this is a great way, outside of people who can run for a political seat, this is a great way for people to bring a cultural sensitivity to these things, to help guide processes. I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very intuitive, that the more people we welcome in, the more diversity of thought we're going to have, and the more empathy we're going to create.
Well, but also, and a lot of times when you're talking about empathy with law enforcement, it sounds a little contraindicative, but if it informs better processes to actually keep people safe and maintain a better sense of community, then there's no reason not to.
Right.
Yeah.
And, to that point, some of the things that I've thought about in terms of like how we can reform the way we police. I've looked at other parts of the country. For instance, in the city of Denver in Colorado, they have a special team that will be sent out when it's considered a low risk call, for want of a better word. In other words, we know this could be handled differently than having people show up with guns, basically. So if it's a domestic situation, or potentially there's someone who's mentally unstable,
right.
They will send out a team of mental health experts and paramedics and EMTs.
Gotcha.
So they can treat it almost medically as opposed to tactically.
Sure.
And so far, that program became so successful. I mean, I think like the first 600 or 700 calls they had, none of them were escalated to law enforcement, to a tactical response, right? That city council has actually added money to the budget for that program, and neighboring suburbs and cities, Aurora, Colorado Springs, Boulder, they're all impaneling their own version of that team.
That's great.
I believe Dallas County actually has one, although I think they do have officers patrolmen that go on those calls too. But I mean, if you were to ask me my own personal opinion, I think it's better not to bring a tactical response in unless it's necessary, because sometimes that can actually escalate the situation as opposed to de-escalate the situation.
I agree, but I also don't think that there's any reason that we should think that we can't better train law enforcement.
Oh, of course.
Well, with mental health issues, other skills besides just containment and enforcement.
Well, I think, and this has been true through...
Just different tools in the toolbox, basically.
Well, I hear you. And I think this has been endemic to law enforcement, at every level, even if you go as far as like the FBI. Those recruits, those agents are given more firearms training than anything else.
Right.
So really we need to focus on creating a more diverse portfolio in terms of how we educate those people for those roles.
Sure.
And like you said, it could also include some medical training, some mental health training. I also think, as someone who's participated in martial arts since I was 10, I have actually seen programs where, for instance, USA Judo has sponsored a program for police officers in Tarrant County to teach them, hand-to-hand techniques.
Sure.
And while it sounds bad, it sounds violent, it's actually a way to de-escalate a problem.
Yeah.
Pulling your gun shouldn't be the first club out of the bag, right?
Well, with most martial arts training, you learn a lot of non-lethal ways of containing people.
Right.
And it's very mindful.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have to strike people first, to get them to comply.
Sure.
Treat people like human beings. You can de-escalating a situation can make it better for everybody.
Well, I remember an anecdote from an officer one time saying that the best weapon that he ever had was a box full of Doritos, like little bags of Doritos.
Right.
And so he'd roll up on somebody and say, "Hey, man, why don't you come have a bag of chips and have a talk with me?" And, would be able to kind of diffuse whatever was going on without having to take somebody to jail necessarily.
Right.
It's
kind of like a Jedi mind trick,
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe once upon a time you could have pulled out a thing of cigarettes and say, "Hey, you want to smoke?"
Exactly.
It's okay.
But most people won't turn down Doritos. Okay. Well, that's okay. Is there anything else on that we want to hit on?
We should also make sure that we have the most, current state of the art software that helps to track crimes and the level of violence in various pockets in the community.
Sure.
Because a lot of big cities or municipalities have that capability right now, and it helps you to identify hotspots that are. So you'll automatically put more personnel in those areas than you would, as opposed to just kind of making it more equal. Because and we've talked about this before. Like Collin County has, in terms of its population, there are pockets of people. It's not like this even disbursement. You have some very highly concentrated areas.
That's true.
So you obviously want to follow the map, so to speak.
Right. But then also you can see like what crimes are like consistently occurring even in those pockets, and how could we more specifically address those things?
Right. The frequency.
Get a little bit more flexible.
Right. The frequency of certain crimes.
Yeah.
Just the types of crimes. I mean, like in small town America, there are certain crimes that don't happen there because of the makeup of the people that live there.
That's true.
And they, sometimes they need to be brought up to speed by an outside, consultant or something like that, because it's just they know their communities and they're not used to those types of crimes, particularly really violent crimes.
That's true.
So there's some of that too, and with Collin, I mean there's a huge portion of it that's still rural. So there's still some of that small town, kind of environment aspect that goes with it.
Sure. Yeah. I remember one time hearing someone speak on the power of being a good neighbor, and they were noting all these facts and figures saying, in the case of a medical emergency, a neighbor might be able to assist with something faster than EMTs even would. Or, if you're in distress, run next door. If your neighbor knows you, they'll be a lot more likely to let you in, help you, like just the power of that connection.
Right.
Yeah.
And it does seem like the power of community, the things that bond have been fraying loose
Yeah.
For a long time now. And like you said, it's really, people who are listening to this and people who are going to vote, they should also start thinking, we should be empowering them to, be more involved in their own personal neighborhoods, network. In the Democratic Party, we actually came up with the idea that our precinct chairs, basically neighborhoods, people who are in charge of live in those neighborhoods and basically in charge of, our get out the vote efforts there, should be doing more to get more personally, involved in those neighborhoods, meet their neighbors,
Absolutely.
be more proactive. Yeah. That way they take care of each other.
Absolutely.
And also it benefits us, come election time.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's very
so
true.
So what they'll do is we had, one of my fellow candidates, his wife is a precinct chair. She came up with the idea, let's have precinct parties. So the precinct chair will host events at their homes. I've been to a couple of these, and it's great because if they're able to get the word out, it's a very intimate way to get to know, my neighbors and in a way that they enjoy.
That's great. I like that. And again, a lot of this just sounds kind of apolitical. It's not even, I wouldn't even call it partisanship. This is just about like building respect and communication.
No, not at all. And I would say the more partisan end of politics comes from just what gets released into the political zeitgeist, in the media. It's really, once you get down to the grassroots level, it operates very differently,
It is.
Like the communications director for like a governor campaign is going to be a lot different than how somebody in a race like mine is going to manage,
That's true.
what gets said in public, I mean, I don't have a communications director. I am the communications director, but
God help you.
But my message is going to be framed differently, and for good reason.
That's true. That's true. Okay. So let's talk about mental health.
Okay.
Touched on it briefly, but what kind of plans do you have there, or what needs do you see need to be addressed from your position?
Well, I say it's interesting. It's also very sad. You would think a county like Collin would have a very diverse, robust portfolio of essential services for people.
Right.
And when we get into the area of healthcare and mental health care, it becomes a lot more problematic because Collin does not run a hospital district, and it doesn't run a single clinic. So, in fact, I've spoken with people at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, and they tell me about how much money that they spend just on residents from neighboring counties.
Oh, absolutely.
And that they basically don't even get recompensated for that.
Nope.
So the fact that a rich county like Collin is essentially like a deadbeat dad, in that we're not paying our bills for the people who leave the county to get health care.
That's very true.
We could do a better way, find a better way of, helping, people who need it the most. And, I've actually kind of done some fact finding. I've made phone calls to these departments just to see what it's like to go through that process. If you're trying to get indigent care, or trying to find mental health assistance, or let's say you're we had our friend Jesse Ringness in here before, and he talked about his experience with
his mom
as a caregiver, right? And now his sister, and just how difficult it is for people with special needs get help, and also the people that take care of them, just the hoops that they have to jump through.
Right.
I mean, if you needed indigent care in Collin County, if you were to approach the county and say, look, I can't afford health care. How can you help me?
Right.
They have you fill out what is essentially a 16-page document. And in it, you're going to be required to provide your tax returns and your bank statements. Now, I can tell you as a financial advisor who helps people at that end of the economic strata, they don't have those things at the ready. No. In fact, most people, like even middle class, working class people, nuclear families don't have that stuff. Yeah. It's just not something that, they don't have that level of sophistication necessarily. Right. So for us I think it's very punitive to make that. I mean, I understand it's government money, and you want to, look out for fraud, but at the same time, we have to be sympathetic to these people and to make it a lot easier for them to get access. So the way that we're doing it right now is totally bass backwards, if you ask me. And I mean, we barely fund those services as it is, and they're very staggered. So it's not like say like Parkland that can cater to any need.
Right.
If you have a specific need, then there's a specific number that you have to call
That's
to
very
address
true.
that need.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's even like a special department that handles like, STDs of all things, I mean, because that's obviously an important public health issue. But I mean, just seeing it laid out that way, it's kind of funny.
It's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, and considering the kind of politics that what influences politics in Collin County, just the idea that they have that is
right. Mental health to me is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. Number one, not just because I work in the field and I've seen, what the nuts and bolts of it and how difficult it can be to access services, but also it's something that people typically think is somebody else's problem.
Right.
Whereas most people don't realize that they could be a day away from a diagnosis that would change their entire life. And I'm not just talking about mental health. Like, out of the blue, you could be feeling perfectly fine, suddenly very fatigued one day, and oh, look, guess what? You've got multiple sclerosis. Like,
right.
Great. That's going to change your entire life, So the thing that I see often, again, with mental health, and going back to what you were talking about having a county hospital for that, like, I'm an outpatient therapist. If I have a client dealing with their normal life, they become suicidal and depressed, I'm like, well, to see a psychiatrist as an outpatient, you're going to have a month wait. A month to see just a specialist. If you try to go to the ER, you'll be seen by a medical doctor. Maybe they'll have a psychiatrist on staff, but they don't have any place to keep you if you're suicidal. So where are you going to go?
And
you're going to get transported to Parkland.
To say nothing of what it will cost to acquire their services, even if you could get them. So,
and that's a whole other bucket of fish. But yeah, no, it's not, and unfortunately, the point at which people need those services, they're the least capable to engage them.
Right.
So it has to be as fast and simple as possible.
Well, I think what's helped precipitate just the way the society is changing its view on mental health. I still believe that there's a very strong stigma that goes to it.
Sure.
It's in many parts it's treated as a weakness. It's not a strength necessarily to admit that you have that type of health problem, but that's what it is. It is a health problem and needs to be addressed by medical professionals. But we are at a place now where it is becoming more,
essential.
It's easier. Well, no, just easier.
Yeah.
Culturally speaking, for you to admit that you have a problem,
right,
and that you're going to address it.
That's good. Yeah.
So really, and a lot of that is ideological. So in terms of politics, depending on who's in charge, you're going to you'll probably see more of a focus on it if you have, Democrats running.
Yeah.
Public health, as opposed to other people, shall we say,
like businesses who want to profit
and
from
that's
private businesses,
right? And that's another good point. In Collin County, there a lot of public health response is outsourced to private facilities, and that's just still, again, we're passing the buck. We don't, whether it's to a private facility or whether it's to a hospital district in a neighboring county, they just. It's so amazingly dangerous how
you're at a loss for words.
I mean, it's a joke that we just it's a pathetic attempt to look like we're providing these services, and we're not. We're just not invested.
We're not. And you mentioned the county jail earlier about mental health, but the problem with that is, if we're only addressing mental health care needs from a county perspective at the jail level, then that obviously causes a problem for people to either harm themselves or harm others being in jail.
Right, and
that way.
And that's another point I wanted to bring up that's another way that we've brought this issue to, into the public view is because of what's happening in our criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And how we're failing.
Yeah.
In that regard too. So, I mean, we've had 2 deaths in the last year at the county jail. And both of them could have been prevented had we had, proper mental health supervision and just supervision in general. And that goes back to, again, not just the fact that we have fewer people, employed there,
Sure.
but the right people.
Right. Okay. So I want to move on to talk about infrastructure, because you just literally came out of a meeting with the director of the Regional Transportation Council, Michael Morris.
Yes.
And your opponent is with that.
Is chair of that arm of,
Right.
let's
So
see if I can.
that's an interesting dynamic there, that meeting you just had.
Right. Well, I was kind of, sniffing around his backyard a little bit.
That's good.
But yeah, Director Morris, he does a terrific job. He's definitely someone who works for a living. He's not a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
He's not, he's not a politician. He's just interested in getting things done. And I reached out to the RTC because I wanted to get a better understanding of how we're going to be prepared in terms of infrastructure going forward.
Right.
And in Collin County, that's a big issue, and it's a big bipartisan issue, because it not only helps make people's lives easier on a personal level, but it helps with the transit of goods and services.
Absolutely. Right.
So right now, if you look at Collin County, a map of it, really the most services that are available as far as transit goes, and when we're talking about transit, I'm talking about people getting from A to B, right?
Right.
Actually, Plano, West Plano is the best place to be because they have a relationship with DART, and so they can make those services available to their residents.
Right.
But once you get outside of Plano and you get into Allen, McKinney, so forth, the number of available services dwindles rapidly. And in 2021, there was a study that was commissioned by the RTC, and careful now, we're getting into the alphabet soup.
Yeah.
But for the sake of giving my vocal cords a break, they commissioned a transit study, which basically admitted that we're not helping enough people in enough ways.
Yeah.
And that's where I was able to learn where those services were concentrated.
Gotcha.
There are even voucher programs for Uber,
Wow.
in like surrounding cities, and it's another one of those areas where you just kind of you make
How? Okay.
like you kind of just awestruck at how little we're invested there.
Right.
And look, Collin County is starting to bear all of the hallmarks of a major metropolis.
Yes.
Right. So we have growing infrastructure needs because our population is growing. The ERs are starting to see more activity. That's why they were overwhelmed during COVID.
Yep.
And that's another area that's where manpower is critical.
Yeah.
That and in our public school system, we're seeing that again.
Very true.
So just in terms of accessing services,
So the congestion issue,
right.
and it feels like to me that specifically impacts smaller businesses more.
Well, smaller businesses, but also low wage jobs,
Right.
which are, there's a statewide plan. It's called Texas 2036, and they're anticipating roughly 70+% of the jobs. Well, actually, 70+% of the jobs that we'll have by 2036 will require post-secondary education.
Oh.
The vast majority of jobs now that exist and ones are going to be created are low-wage jobs,
Right.
low-skilled work.
Right.
And people are not going to like this, but the truth is Texas is a state, its workforce is dominated by people who are not native to Texas.
That's true.
So if you're upset about immigration and you want Texas to thrive, you're going to have to square that circle somehow.
Yeah. We have to reconcile it somehow.
Yeah. So, but back to, things like the actual physical logistics in terms of infrastructure. We're expecting to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $10-15 billion on that, in the next 10-20 years.
Okay.
But that figure is just for new construction.
Oh,
We're not even talking about what it's going to
Repair.
cost to maintain
Oh.
what we already have. So you might as well double that figure, and then you get a sense as,
Yeah.
okay, is this going to be possible?
Right.
Not just in terms of can we raise the money, but are we going to have the political will?
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to muscle that to get that done?
yeah, very true.
So, so one of the things, and I kind of lean on my business background when I think about how I want to approach this and how we address it.
Okay.
Is, I mentioned earlier about how dense the populations are, in very
Little
particular
pockets.
areas, right?
Yeah.
We should be focusing on expanding the economy, so to speak, in those areas, so
Gotcha.
that forget about the time that they spend commuting to work,
Right.
just about basic needs and services right in their backyard.
Yeah.
Right. That in and of itself would take enormous pressure off of our
That's very true. Yeah.
off our highway system, just right away.
Yeah. Fewer times going to and fro in cars, spending money on gas, things like that.
I mean, if you just drive around Collin County right now, and if you're at a major intersection and it's like 4 or 5 p.m., when school's letting out and when people are going home,
Yeah.
I mean, I look at my Google Maps and I just see, Carmine red.
Yep. Just all over.
Like what I did there,
Your map
Carmine.
is, that was good. Your map's just bleeding red.
Yeah, it looks
That's very
like
true.
It looks like you're giving blood to
Yeah.
to Google Maps. It could take you 30 minutes to get somewhere where it ordinarily would take 5 or 10.
Gotcha.
So that's a problem, obviously.
Yeah.
One of the issues that I've been also exploring is broadband access, and this is also something that's come up a lot in the campaign.
Okay.
I briefly touched on this with Director Morris, but I did actually in the primary, I attended a conference for county commissioners and candidates.
All right.
Although I will say it was mostly rural county commissioners who were present there. Nobody from my neck of the woods, so it was a little lonely. But
Tell you who cares.
yeah, but I met a lot of nice people, a lot of interesting people, but by far the theme of that conference was broadband access. And so the state of Texas is slated to get money for just that purpose. I addressed this in a speech a couple of weeks ago, where I said, part of the money is coming from ARPA, which is the American Reinvestment,
Here
Plan
you go
Act.
with the alphabet soup.
Yeah, the American Rescue Plan. See, I can't remember. The ARPA package that was passed in President Biden's first year, and then the infrastructure bill.
Gotcha.
So from ARPA, I believe we're getting $400 million that's earmarked just for broadband access for Texas,
Okay.
and another $100 million from the infrastructure bill. Although that's weird, it seems like the two should be flipped based on where they're titled.
A little
right?
strange, but sure.
And there are potentially hundreds of millions of more that will be allocated, but it's all that money is going to, originate at the U.S. Treasury.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
The state of Texas is hardly spending any money, even though it's created. Here we go again. The Texas Broadband Office to help appropriate, kind of be the filter,
Yes.
or like they might say the broadband bank for Texas.
Okay.
They're going to help administer the money, but it's really federal dollars that are going to be funding this. And I mention that because anyone who follows politics will know, or may have heard, that not a single Texas Republican voted for either one of those bills.
Right.
So that was all political capital that was spent by Democrats. It was all appropriated by Democrats, but Republicans are wasting no time in going and cutting those ribbons,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So remember, who is really,
Who's really
putting
doing the
in.
work? Yeah.
Exactly. And
Not just spending the money.
right.
Yeah.
And who really deserves the credit
That's very true.
for us having that capability. And broadband access is enormously important.
Yeah.
And I often liken it to, broadband is to the now as the interstate system was to the 1950s.
Absolutely.
Right before we even had major roads and highways,
Sure.
so that trucks could, safely
Yeah.
get about the country.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essential to any economy. And people often forget it's not just about getting access to residents in rural areas where it's more difficult. And by the way, we're going to be spending that money on building more towers. We're not going to literally dig cables into the ground and connect every house. That would logistically and financially be next to impossible.
Sure.
So that's how we're going to deal with that. But also, because of the demand that we're going to have from our incorporated areas, our major cities like Plano and Allen and McKinney and Frisco, every part of our everyday life is affected by it. The justice system now is more reliant on that need because COVID created the need.
I was going to say, I feel like COVID shifted our perception of that thing. Had you said broadband access, 5 years ago, everybody would have been thinking people out in the country don't need to, scroll on Instagram all day. It's like, that's not what we're talking about anymore. This is how people work. This is even how people access mental health services.
Right. The priorities have shifted.
Absolutely.
Enormously. So it's my own dad, who's an attorney, told me, basically an entire segment of his business evaporated during the pandemic because it was totally reliant upon getting his clients into court.
Yeah.
That was a main, piece of that, of providing that service for that particular types of cases.
Now court sessions happen via Zoom.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, they're obviously going back to, to normal, but they're still, because they started using it, they haven't.
But why not?
Stop.
Yeah.
Right. So the court system, our schools. Yeah. Same thing's happening there. Yeah. The demand created it, and now the demand is still there, albeit less than it was during COVID. But now the good news is, if we have another pandemic-like event, and I would say we're going to. We don't know what it's going to be or when. Sure. But I can promise you, as a son of the South, we have to be prepared for the next emergency. Yeah. And in Texas, we learned that could be COVID, or it could be something like the grid. Yeah. That's knocked out by too much heat or too much cold.
I just feel like it is. If there's any benefit to the quarantine, it was that it gave us this new flexibility with all of these different ways that we interact. And we used to have to interact in person, like work, like school, things like that. Court systems, like even if there's not going to be another pandemic, like let's say you have a kid that's experiencing social problems in school, they're acting out. Normally that kid could just be put on suspension. We could move them to an online classroom and they could do it from home. That way they're not interacting in person with other kids, causing trouble, but they could still keep up with their educational needs. Like there's just I think we've just realized there's a necessity point with it that we've never had before, which does make your comparison to the interstate system just blatantly obvious.
Right.
So.
And we have to, that kind of parlays into, okay, just ordinary residents in their homes are going to need a reliable connection. Raise your hand. I'm talking to anybody out there. If you've had a Zoom call that didn't cut out at least once.
Oh God, yes.
In the last 3 years.
Lord.
So.
You're frozen.
Yeah, right.
Jeez.
So it would be nice to be able to get through one of those things without having a problem.
It would, yeah. Yeah.
And then, this. Yep. Another area that's been greatly affected is healthcare.
Absolutely.
So
half of my caseload is telehealth sessions these days. I do in person again, but because I have a state license, I can see anybody anywhere.
Right.
Which is great because I have a specialty. So if people were to try to find somebody with a specialty in their rural area, they might not be able to find one they could see in person. Mm-hmm. But because I'm so flexible now with, broadband access and hopefully increasing, you can access a specialist from any place, which is fantastic.
Right. And in terms of like I mentioned the Texas 2036 plan, they're expecting, millions of people to be added in what they call the triangle, which is Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. Yeah. That particular area is where we're going to see the most explosive growth. And, we're talking like 8-10 million people. So naturally, if you just follow the simple rules of economics, that's going to create demand. Yep. And if we don't have the capacity to meet it, then we're going to create more problems. So unfortunately, and this is another thing that I feel like I bring to the table as your next commissioner, would be able to, putting my focus on anticipating the problems of tomorrow.
Yeah.
right? And when I say, I don't mean like literally tomorrow. I mean,
Down the road.
yeah, because corporate America is focused on the next fiscal quarter.
Yeah.
I want to focus on the next quarter of a century.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because of the nature of our politics, it is so fragmented in terms of like its short-term view. It's really hard to get things done with a long-term vision behind it, right?
That's very true.
Because people don't see anything. They can't process a problem unless it's right in front of them, because that's going to take precedence over anything else.
Right.
But you need to have people like that to be looking out for,
Yeah.
for everyone, for what's going to happen down. And that's why I was talking about, our next pandemic-like event, or our next winter storm event. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. And that, unfortunately, is going to require some pain and some long-term planning,
That's very true.
And not just in terms of like the infrastructure that we built to meet it, but also in terms of leadership at the government level, right? I can tell you from experience that communication between local, state, federal government is essential in order to manage a crisis situation or, an emergency management situation.
Yep.
So we need to make sure that we have a plan, a turnkey plan that's ready to go to meet any potential disaster that may befall us. It could be a pandemic. It could be weather related.
Right.
It could be, another big one is clean water.
Yeah.
It could be, we bust a main somewhere, a very important one,
Right.
that we're going to have to fix, or we can anticipate that problem, say, yeah, that's going to happen. So why don't we update that now?
Probably kind of bad that we have all of our eggs in that one basket and it's looking a little rickety. So yeah, might want to think about that.
Right. And
That's very true.
And one of the things we should be looking to is sharing more information with our neighbors, our neighbors in government,
Right.
Surrounding counties, like Rockwall and Denton and Tarrant, because they might have some ideas that we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's a general problem with the Commissioner's Court in Collin is we're not being progressive enough in our thinking. And when I say progressive, I don't mean ideologically.
No.
I mean just
Future based.
yeah. Let's just think of let's get some new ideas in here.
Right.
Let's stop. Why don't we lead?
Not programs
these
for
issues?
now, more durable and flexible programs.
Or just have something on our website just for the sake of being able to tell people, yeah, we've got that. You can do that.
That's great. I like that. Well, speaking of, we're pretty much at the max of our time today.
Yes.
So you brought a website. Would you like to tell everyone where they could go to find out more information about your campaign?
Yes, you can go to jeffforcollincounty.com. So either the number 4 or FOR.
Both work.
Right, both work.
Great.
And you can contact the campaign directly, particularly if you have questions about voting.
Great.
We're coming up on the deadline there in terms of when you can be registered. I think that's October 10th.
Yep. Early voting starts October 24th.
24th. I'm telling everyone, especially at the doors, that if you're going to vote in person and vote early.
Yeah.
Because the crowds are smaller, and just what I'm hearing about how those voting precincts are going to be staffed with the the voting judges and the poll watchers.
Right.
I'm worried there's going to be some friction there that's going to cause chaos.
Sure.
I mean,
we should also say you should probably go make sure that you know where your local polling station will be because it's changed, right?
It's kind of like a hurricane. Be prepared.
Yeah.
Have your plan ready.
Yeah. Well, districts have been redrawn and things like that. So you should know, exactly where you go for your thing, not have to go to 3 different places on the day you plan to vote.
Right. Yeah.
Because you thought it was over here. It turns out it's now over here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And believe me, if you reach out to a candidate or you reach out to the local party, those are the kinds of questions that we want to get from you.
We want to help you.
Right, exactly. So we'll get you registered, or we'll give you the dates you need to know. We'll tell you where you can vote. We'll tell you who's on your ballot. All those things.
That's where you started with all this. I remember when you were signing people up to vote.
That's right.
That was fantastic.
That's right. In fact, it was at the Plano Balloon Festival, which started today. So
hey!
We're going to have a booth out there,
Great.
and you'll get to meet candidates. And if you haven't voted yet, you can register there too.
Come on by, get a turkey leg, and sign up to vote.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.